Greetings from Tokyo, I'm Trip, and welcome to the Hammer of Wrath. This week, you and I are going to complete an Ork Combat Patrol. Let's go. Thanks for joining me in the studio. This week we celebrate the most festive of months, Orktober, by continuing our challenge of completing a combat patrol every month and tackling the Ork Combat Patrol. But first, I want to talk very briefly about bicycles in Japan. While there are nowhere near as many bicycles in Japan as there are in China, it is still a very popular means of transportation for both children and adults alike. And it is not uncommon to see what I showed you in the intro, a vast bicycle parking lot around every metro station. But there are two things that are very different about bicycles in Japan. One, children don't learn using training wheels. In Japan, at a very early age, 2 or 3, children are given what's called a balance bike. And this is a small bike with no pedals or chain drive, and it's meant to just instinctively teach them how to balance on a two-wheeled vehicle. And once they get that balance down by sort of kicking their little feet along and learning the balance, then they're just given a bike with pedals, and it's an instant jump. And as someone who's just trained a 6-year-old in how to ride a bike the traditional way, I can tell you that the Japanese way is much easier. Now, the other thing that's different about bicycles here in Japan are the prevalence of mamachari, or mama chariot, because in Japan, everything has to be shorter. A mamachari is distinctive for two features. One, there is almost always a children's seat on the back and sometimes on the front as well. And two, there is a battery-assisted drive in the center column to help with going uphill. And when you're carrying 2 young kids to preschool, that helps. Well, enough about bicycles in Japan. Let's tackle this week's challenge, and it's the Ork Combat Patrol. I haven't owned Orks since 5th edition. Now, some of you may remember the 5th edition starter set, Assault on Black Reach. That's what got me into the hobby, and the Orks are the first models I ever painted. But knowing that I was going to play Tyranids and knowing that I didn't want to field 2 horde armies, I sold off all of the Orks from that set after I painted them. But that's not to say that I didn't have a great time doing it. And having not painted Orks for more than 10 years, I have to be honest and say that I was very excited to pick up the Combat Patrol. And the new sculpts and builds are incredible. And unsurprisingly, building and painting these crazy little psychos was the most fun I've had in the hobby in I don't even know how long. So let me show you how I built and painted the Ork Combat Patrol. This Combat Patrol is huge. It's nearly a pound of plastic and is packed with sprues. So I got my tools ready, and we're going to begin with the Boyz. Now we're going to power through these. We don't want to get caught up in the details, and the trick to this technique is to just hit the broad strokes, put in our large areas of color, and then just hide everything under grime, rust, and muck. You have to trust me here, it's going to turn out great. This is Vallejo Black Primer. It goes on really well, creates this incredibly smooth coat. And then I'm just going to hit all the skin areas with a Zenithal top-down highlight of white. I'm going to go ahead and hit the arms, hands, and any other bare skin on the model. And we don't need to be super accurate here. If there's a little overspray, it doesn't matter. I'm going to hit the base with some pale sand. And again, if there's overspray on the feet, it just doesn't matter. It's going to look like dust on their shoes and pants. I'm going to hit the pants here with a Steel Legion drab. It's a very desaturated brown. Overspray, not a problem. We're not worried about it. Speed is the key here. Once we've got those basic tones thrown in, we're going to move on to all of our metallics here. And I'm just going to do an overbrush. That's like a dry brush, but there's a lot more paint on the brush. I'm going to do an overbrush of a 1-to-1 combination of lead belcher and canoptic alloy. Once that's set, I'm going to mix an oil wash of Van Dyke brown and black. Again, this is just very inexpensive oil paint and some mineral spirits, and we're going to slop that all over the model anywhere that's not white. We want to leave the skin alone for now, but all the other details, the weapons, the clothing, the armor plating, we're going to give that about 15 minutes to dry, and we're going to use a makeup sponge here and some mineral spirits, and we're just going to go ahead and we're going to wipe the models down. And what this does is it removes the oil paint from the high surfaces, but leaves it in the recesses, so we're going to get that shading and grime. Once the oil paints are dried, we're we're going to go ahead and dry brush all of our metallics with lead belcher. We want to bring out some of those highlights again. And now that we've got our metallics and our clothing done, it's time to move on to the skin. Here I'm using a 1-to-1 combination of contrast medium and contrast plague bearer flesh. We just brush this all over the skin areas, let it dry, and then do a second coat. Now, I've always wanted to try Dirty Down Rust. The effect that it produces is amazing. Unfortunately, it is impossible to find in Japan, and I didn't want to pay 3 times the cost of the bottle to have it shipped from overseas. My local hobby shop had this, but unfortunately it's an enamel, and I just don't want to mess with those. They're such a headache. But next to it on the shelf was this. It is a water-based wash, which is a light rust, so I grabbed that for $3. And while it's nowhere near as incredible as Dirty Down Rust, it does the trick. It's easy to overdo rust, but the key is to just place it in the corners and crevices where water and corrosion would collect. So here, like along the base of the spikes. Once I've got my rust down, I'm going to use some weathering powders on the base. Here I'm using a combination of 2 different weathering powders to bring in some variation and keep it from looking too uniform. Once that's done, we'll paint our rims and our Boyz will be done. Moving on to the Deffkoptas. These are some of my favorite models. I absolutely loved putting them together in Assault on Black Reach, and these new kits are just exceptional. They don't have clear flight stands. They've got these really great sculptural bases that connect to the choppers, and each one is different. The primer does an excellent job of unifying the model and maintaining all of those details. Here, pale sand on the base. We're just going to spray that all over. Later we'll hit that with weathering powders. And just like on the weapons, because this is mostly metallic, we're going to do an overbrush. We're not being tidy. We're putting it anywhere there's going to be metal parts. If there's some of the primer showing through in the shadows, all the better. That's going to up the contrast on the model. Once we have our metallics down, we're going to do an all-over wash of Agrax Earthshade. This is going to tinge the metal, make it dirty. Again, there's no such thing as a clean orc. As the wash dries on the metals, we're going to move on to other parts of the model. I'm going to use Corax White for really great coverage on any place that's going to be white, or in the case of the large bomb here, any place that needs a color over top of it. This sort of became an accent color throughout the entire army. You'll notice that on the rocket troops or on the Deff Dread or the Warboss, there are these little punches of red throughout the army that act as an accent. Here we return to Oil Wash, the coverer of 1,000 sins. It looks really great on orc models or anything else you want to make grimdark. Honestly, it feels like cheating sometimes. The effect that it gives you with such little effort is actually really rewarding and does a great job of sort of pushing the model farther along than you can with just acrylics. We're going to use that same technique to put down the skin and then of course some rust. Making rusty metal is really gratifying. It's easy to overdo. You kind of want to just sit there and put rust on everything. And here on the copper parts, it's a chance for me to use the GW Technical Paint Nihilok Oxide, which I've had in my collection forever but almost never use. And of course we finish off the base with some weathering powders. Moving on to the Deff Dread, this was another really fun build. I don't know how the old kit is, but the new kit goes together like a dream. Honestly, the panels fit together perfectly, and using Tamiya Thin, it just makes it a ton easier. This is a really great plastic glue. It sets really quickly for a plastic glue, creates an incredible bond. Now there are specific weapon loadouts in the Combat Patrol. I didn't worry about magnetizing here, I just had fun building it. Apparently it has 3 of these stabby, you get to choose your stabby, grindy parts, but there is 1 rocket launcher on it. Now a big model like this, I can't imagine brush priming it. The airbrush primer just sort of makes it like a cheat code. Now you'll notice that there's a lot of overspray on the white here. Not a problem. Honestly, we're not going to worry about it. Orks would have overspray if they sprayed something, and we can always just tidy up what we want to tidy up. Not worrying about that. We're going to move on. We're going to overbrush all of our metallics here like we did on the Deffkoptas. We're just having fun, kind of going nuts on the model. Honestly, this technique is a really fast way to bring out the detail on all of these metallic parts and suits orcs perfectly. Once we've got the dry brush done, we're going to put on that all-over oil wash. Now, the armor panels. I've painted everything here in lead belcher during the overbrush, and I want to put a black on top of that. So we are going to work our way right up to the edges here, leaving the exposed metal on the edges to indicate chipping and damage. Moving on to the rust, again, it's easy to overdo it here, but where you want to make sure you don't put it is on the pistons or other moving parts. Rust would not gather there. And we're going to finish off our base here with our weathering powders. Again, we want to do a mix of several different powders so that it's not uniform and artificial looking. And we finish the rim of the base with some Steel Legion drab. Moving on to the Warboss, another really great build in the kit, went together very easily. Now I have left some sub-assemblies here. I can take the arms off, I can take the backpack off. This is going to allow me to get access to parts of the model that would normally be blocked if I glued it together. And as this is our HQ, we're going to put a little extra effort in here. We can sort of skip the details on all of the troops and other things like that, but when it comes to your HQ units, that's where you really put in your time. So while we are using that contrast paint to put down our skin tones, what we are going to do afterwards though is go in with a fine detail brush, bring in some other greens and yellows to really sort of accentuate the skin on the Grot and the Warboss. Using a similar technique here, we're going to use our lead belcher all over the model. We're going to get our metallics down, and then we'll go through and put that black paint over top. Now, would it make more sense to simply paint the panels black and then bring in the chipping along the edges using the metallics? Yes, but the way my mind works is that I know that the paint is supposed to be over the metal, so I have to do it that way. And I think the results actually turn out really well. Now, the trick when you're doing this is to remember that the paint is going to chip along any active edge, and that's going to give you this really great effect that the armor has been worn through a lot of different battles. Moving on to his loincloth here, I'm just going to lay down a base of Blood Angel's contrast over the brown. This is going to keep it from being too punchy and saturated. Once that's dry, I'll go through with Vallejo Blood Red here and just hit the accents in the folds to make it pop a little bit. On the haft of his chain axe here, we're just going to use Contrast Wildwood. This stuff makes an absolutely awesome looking leather effect in a single coat. Then moving on to the rust, we're going to keep this to a minimum on some of the small corners of the suit, and we get the chance to use the Nihilic Oxide again. Moving on to his face, we're going to touch up some of the details in his skin, introduce some more tones, and we'll go through and very carefully paint all of his teeth and tongue. The trick here is to take your time and use a very fine brush. Now I've got something special planned. Years ago I bought this. It's the Heroic Base Kit. I've used a few of these here and there in other armies. This one we're going to use this really great sort of sewer pipe, and I've got an idea here. So we're going to clip this out, put it together, and what we'll do is we'll create a toxic sludge base. I want to go ahead and weather my pipe here, and then we're going to have an underglow coming from the toxic sludge. So we're going to use this really great technical paint from Games Workshop called Tesseract Glow. I put a few skulls from the basing kit in the toxic pit, and then we're going to airbrush some greens in there to give it depth. And then it's just a matter of taking this clear resin that I purchased at the dollar store, very carefully applying that. The surface tension and viscosity are going to keep it from running over the edge. We'll just stick that under a UV light, and 3 minutes later, we've got a toxic pool. We go ahead and attach the pipe to that and then work our way through the base. We're going to weather the rest of the top here. I'm going to go ahead and use the sponge and that rust paint to finish it off. And with the base complete, we remove our model from its temporary base, and using plastic glue, we then attach him to the heroic base. And that completes our combat patrol. And there you have it, one completed Ork Combat Patrol in celebration of the month of Orktober. I hope you enjoyed the video. It was my genuine pleasure to make and share it with you. If you'd like to support the channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. Drive us to the front of YouTube. Or you can always join our Patreon. Joining our Patreon at any level grants you access to our private Discord server, where we help each other become better hobbyists through honest and kind feedback every day. In fact, that small growing community there is the reason I'm still doing this. It is because of their donations that I'm able to go out and purchase a combat patrol like this and complete it. So thanks again for all your amazing support. Also, be sure to check out our t-shirt shop, bakingsodatees.com, where we create unique, one-of-a-kind designs available nowhere else. Well, thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.